Perhaps the greatest invention of the Jews in these Hellenistic cities was the synagogue. Synagogue itself is a Greek word. There's no Hebrew equivalent. It means meeting house. Now, the first records we have are about the 2nd century BC. There are already hundreds of them then. This one, which is really the finest that survived since antiquity, is a lot later than that. It's a magnificent building. It's because it's in the city of Sardis. Sardis was a great trading city. It was at the end of a long road from Asia Minor to Persia. Those lorries are still roaring up and down a new road built on top of it. That's where the Jews of Sardis got their wealth to build this splendid building. So these Jewish meeting houses, they were used for a variety of purposes. But the most important thing that went on in these synagogues was the study of the law and the reading of the holy books. The law, of course, was the very heart of Judaism. Its observance, its strict observance, was what kept the whole community and the idea of Judaism together. And never did it need to be studied with such care as in these Hellenistic cities, because everywhere the Jews went, they walked on a knife edge, on the knife edge of breaking the holy covenants. I mean, it's a million examples I could pick. Take a couple of the 10 Commandments. You shan't have any graven images. Well, Hellenistic cities are full of graven images. They're full of statues. Every little pillar top might have a little face in it or anything like that. The very money in your pocket has been stamped with a graven image. What do you do about it? Do you carry money? Are you allowed to touch it? Is it clean? How near can you go to statues? Can you walk under colonnades? All these questions concerning the law, these ancient laws, which were suddenly brought into high relief in these new cities. This is style. You know, this is Greek culture as a style, and it's a very important thing in the story of the Bible. Everybody wanted to be Greek. And of course, the Jews in these cities wanted to join in that too. There were Jews living in these cities hundreds of years before this library was born, who were already only speaking Greek, who were thinking in Greek ways. They changed their name to Greek names. Simon was a very popular name. It was a sort of adaptation of the old Hebrew Shimon. And of course, you'd expect the great Hebrew holy text, our Old Testament, to be translated into this new language for this new sort of Jewish person. There's a lovely legend about it. The story is that in Alexandria in Egypt in the 2nd century before Christ, 72 scholars were engaged to translate the Holy Scriptures. They were put on a sandbank in the sea outside the city in little huts. And they all sat down and they wrote out the Holy Hebrew Scriptures, and by the grace of God, each one of their translations was the same as the other. This translation is called the Septuagint, so there were 72 of these scribes, 6 for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. On balance, inside all the stresses and strains that were going on in Judaism, it seemed that Hellenism would eventually win out. In the 2nd century BC, it's reported that the high priest of the Temple of Jerusalem had actually knocked off work early, that is, left the rituals of the temple to go and watch athletes practicing in a gymnasium. Well, the sophisticates of Jerusalem were already Hellenized, but the country people and their priests were outraged, and there was a great kerfuffle about it. Not nearly such a kerfuffle as a few years later, when a Syrian Hellenistic prince actually invaded the state of Israel itself. I suppose his idea was that he would bring all the advantages of Hellenism to these barbarous people. It's amazing what he did. He actually invaded Jerusalem. He set up a pagan altar in the temple. He forbade the reading of Hebrew scriptures, and he forbade circumcision. Well, that was enough for the Jews. I mean, they might like Hellenism and its columns, but they weren't going that far. And in an amazing cultural convulsion, they gathered together around a dynasty of country priests called the Maccabees and threw the Syrian prince out. More than that, they actually established a holy state of Israel with the Maccabee princes as sort of kings, priest kings of the holy state of Israel. The priest kings ruled in bloody succession for 100 years before the Romans conquered all of the Hellenistic East. And with it, Judea and Jerusalem. Generally, the Romans were always happy to rule through local client kings. Their puppet in Judea was perhaps the most infamous of all of them, King Herod the Great. 19 years before the birth of Christ, King Herod, wicked King Herod, issued a proclamation to the somewhat startled inhabitants of Jerusalem. A bit of it went like this. Since I am now, by God's will, your governor, and have had peace a long time and gained great riches, and what is the main thing of all, I am very well regarded by the Romans, who, if I may say, are the rulers of the whole world, I will, after the most pious manner suitable to God, render his temple as complete as I am able. Well, nobody would have believed it, but in 10 years, King Herod had practically rebuilt the ancient temple of Jerusalem. When Jesus walked up these steps to go through the door of the temple, he would have had to walk under a Roman eagle. And at the end of the day, the pious Jews really didn't like it. These steps, by the way, weren't just a way of getting into the temple. They were a place for the great academies of Jerusalem. This is where the rabbis came and taught their pupils. This is where the Sadducees and the Pharisees passed. It was where the monkish Essenes used to come and talk to themselves, these strange sects and tribes of Judaism. And above all, perhaps, it was where the zealots came to rouse the rabble. It was where prophets came, where messiahs like Jesus came and talked. Everybody came on these steps and talked. And in the end, that ferment, that hatred of things foreign, the hatred of the foreign image above everything, and the hatred of foreigners on the pure, sacred soil of Israel caused the explosion. The balancing act collapsed. Less than 100 years after King Herod, his temple was absolutely swept off the face of the earth by the Roman army. Jerusalem, the golden city, was destroyed, starved, then burnt after a long siege. So not only was Jehovah's temple destroyed, but the priesthood too, and with it the heart of the ancient Jewish state. The Romans left Judea completely ruined, inhabited by a nation that had lost its centre. It was at this terrible time that the Hebrew Bible, Christianity's Old Testament, would be finally put together. You know, when history books say grand things like the city of Jerusalem was swept from the face of the earth in 70 AD, it doesn't begin to tell you what went on in the streets, does it? Well, this little ruin here does. That over there was the door of this part of the house. The soldiers must have come through this room, and this room, knocking things over as they went, smashing everything before they set fire to it. Bits of human body were found in here. A couple of spears, things like that. Everything smashed, destroyed, carbonized. Look at the walls there, covered in black soot. The plaster burnt red behind. The whole place, in fact, utterly destroyed. It's interesting. This house is actually on the eastern hill overlooking the temple. It's part of an enormous estate of the priests. The priests, in fact, who ruled the state of Judea, the Jewish people. These were rich people. These were Hellenized. Look at that table. You'll see lots of little Hellenic details. Even their name is Greek, Kathros, the house of Kathros. These were conservative, pragmatic people who'd done deals with the Romans. Josephus, the historian, had already given himself up to the Romans after fighting in Galilee in the north, and he'd cleverly made friends with the Emperor Vespasian, and he actually watched the destruction of Jerusalem with the Roman army. Vespasian, Josephus tells us, was rather upset to see his new friend so worried about what had happened to his country, and he asked him if there was anything he wanted from the ruins of the city. Perhaps he wanted to cheer the old scholar up. And Josephus asked only for the holy books. He knew that there must be still fragments of them laying in the ruins of the burnt city, and he went back there and he tells us he picked them up from amongst the embers, these charred remains of the sacred texts of his race. What were they? That's an important question, because these would become the fixed version of the Hebrew Bible, the Christian's Old Testament. Well, the bits that Josephus actually picked up we don't know about, but we do know what the sacred texts were in Jerusalem just before the Roman army approached, because the people of Jerusalem went out and buried large quantities of them in the deserts of Judea to save them from their enemies.